On July 7th, 2018, Stipe Miocic faced Daniel Cormier in the main event of UFC 226 with Miocic's UFC heavyweight belts on the line. Miocic was already the only man to have defended that heavyweight title 3 consecutive times, and in so doing had put himself in the discussion of the greatest heavyweight in the history of the promotion and perhaps the sport. The challenger, Cormier, was the reigning light heavyweight champion, seeking to become only the second fighter to hold 2 UFC belts simultaneously. The narrative was not quite that clean and neat, however. Despite holding the belt, Cormier's light heavyweight run was in some ways defined by having fallen short in 2 attempts to defeat Jon Jones, and ahead of UFC 226, Cormier more or less freely admitted that the move back to heavyweight was a chance to get out from under the shadow of his tormentor and continue building his legacy. Cormier did indeed build his legacy that night, shocking the champ with a huge overhand right and follow-up punches in the first round to win the heavyweight title. By the time Cormier and Miocic met in the octagon again at UFC 241 on August 17th of last year, DC had become the first fighter to successfully defend UFC titles in 2 different weight classes. His oft-stated plan to retire by his 40th birthday had not come to fruition, nor had the rumored big money send-off fight against WWE superstar and former UFC heavyweight champ Brock Lesnar. Nonetheless, he had been busier than Miocic, who had elected to sit out and wait over a year for the title rematch he felt was rightfully his. Miocic's patience paid off in the cage as well on that night in Anaheim, as he weathered a strong early performance by Cormier, losing the first 2 rounds before coming on strong in the third as the champ began to fade, working Cormier over with body shots and putting him away with a barrage of punches late in the fourth. The heavyweight belt was back around the waist of the firefighter from Cleveland, and the rivalry between the UFC's 2 best heavyweights was now 1-1. That brings us to this weekend in Las Vegas and the resolution of that rivalry. Welcome to the Sherdog Radio Network Roundtable for UFC 252, Miocic vs. Cormier 3. I'm your host, Ben Duffy of Sherdog.com, and with me to discuss the rubber match between these 2 all-time greats, as well as every other fight on the card, is an expert panel. I'm excited to be joined by Keith Shillan. Mr. Shillan is the executive producer of the Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network, a host on the Sherdog Radio Network, including the Shillan and Duffy Show, and a writer for Sherdog.com and Cageside Press. Keith, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I mean, the level of professionalism that's going on with the network now, we had like the highest peak in Valiant history. Like, you had this incredible introduction, which is like the peak of professionalism, and then you introduced me, which is like the valley of professionalism. But hats off to you, my man. That was fantastic, brother.
I appreciate it. I learned at the feet of giants. I've been a fan of the Sherdog Radio Network for a lot longer than I've been on this side of the mic. Also joining us this evening is Mr. Tom Feely. Tom is a mixed martial arts analyst and writer for Sherdog.com, where he has been the author of Sherdog's official UFC preview column since 2018. Tom, how are you?
Doing well. Thanks for having me. Legitimately an honor, to kind of, after years of listening to this, to finally be on it. So, and really good card to do so. So happy to be here.
Definitely. Good one to cut your teeth on. The winner of Saturday's main event will have a solid case as the most accomplished UFC heavyweight ever, more than solid if it's Miocic, as well as a spot on the short list for the greatest heavyweight in MMA history. On top of those stakes, Cormier has stated that win or lose, this is going to be his last fight. In light of everything that's on the line, it certainly feels as though this might be the biggest UFC heavyweight title fight ever in terms of competitive excellence and historical importance, even if not pure box office weight. Does it feel like the biggest UFC heavyweight title fight ever to you guys? Either one of you, go for it.
I'll let the guest go first.
All right. I would say in terms of like the short list, it'd probably either have to be this or the first Junior Dos Santos Cain Velasquez fight. I know not from a pure box office standpoint, but just also, I mean, similar stakes in far of, I think in retrospect to, 2 generational talents as far as their era. And also just kicking off the Fox deal and, everything that portended in the future as far as, this was being viewed as the UFC finally making it. So I'd say otherwise, these would be number 1 and number 2 in whatever order. I've talked about a little bit about just, on Twitter and everything, just leading up to this, it's been a little bit of an odd feeling as far as like the trilogy being so drawn out and necessarily like a hype level not being, too high until really I think Fight Week is starting to come together as far as now that everything's in the upcoming in the mirror, basically, when it comes to Daniel Cormier's career, his legacy. Those discussions are happening. I think, now it's starting to feel like, if not number one, number two at worst.
What do you think, Keith? Agree?
Yeah, so there's kind of like three parts to that question, so I'll kind of answer in parts. Now, you said, is this like the most competitive?
Just in terms of the level of the fighters involved, yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to competitiveness, I mean, I don't know, does that top UFC 53, Andre Arlovski versus Justin Eilers for the heavyweight title? Is it more exciting than that? Ooh. Justin Eilers coming off a first-round knockout loss to Paul Buttatello. I mean, when we think about all-time greatest fighters, like across all weight classes, Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier are always going to be in that conversation. I mean, if I was ranking my top 10 fighters ever, I mean, Daniel Cormier is a lock. Stipe Miocic is probably a lock too. And if he wins on Saturday, he's definitely a lock. So for the competitiveness, yes. Now, we're talking about the significance, is what Tom was just talking about. The whether you believe this or not, but the narrative is winner is the greatest heavyweight. Some people say UFC heavyweight ever. Some people say greatest heavyweight regardless. But just to have that title, we haven't had a feel like this in the UFC ever for a heavyweight match. The last time I think a heavyweight match in general was this exciting is probably Fedor Emelianenko versus Mirko Cro Cop. When that fight was finally, they had all these hurdles and every time that, it was like a misstep before. I would say this is probably the most excited I am since that heavyweight matchup. As far as box office, I don't know if it's going to top Brock Lesnar versus Frank Mir at UFC 100. They had the UFC 100 on top of it. They had George St. Pierre and Coleman. I mean, the thing was absolutely loaded. But I definitely think this is the big one, man, and this does so much for both of these guys' legacies. I'm very excited for this matchup.
Thank you. Now, it's been almost exactly a year since the second meeting between these two heavyweight grades, but in that intervening year, the world in general and combat sports in particular could not look much different. Their first two meetings took place against the backdrop of a thunderous T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas and then a packed Honda Center in Anaheim. Whereas this biggest of big title fights, and it sounds like both of you guys put it on the short list of the biggest heavyweight title fights ever, is going to go down in a nearly empty, mostly silent UFC Apex facility. The new normal of mixed martial arts in the era of COVID-19 has provided a different viewing experience, to say the least. Fighters' in-cage talk is audible in a way it rarely was before, if ever, as well as coaches' instructions between rounds. The announcers are clearly audible to the fighters as well as to the cage-side judges. And ironically, Cormier himself, in his job as a color commentator, is one of the chief culprits that people have been able to say that they're able to overhear. In the last almost 6 months now, have the really big fights felt different to you since these changes took place? Have you missed the huge crowds?
I'll go first this time. Yeah, I actually do. I'm a shill for trash talk. I like the drama of things. I like that. I like everything that goes along with the fights. I like the big, Bruce Buffer, super exciting when, it's time, the whole crowd erupts. I like all that stuff. And it's going to feel even worse in this time because Daniel Cormier's last, if he stays true and this is his last fight, win or loss, his last fight should not be not with his famous, that big run that he does. Like, it's going to be really short. And, Stipe coming out with his hat, backwards into the side, like he comes out and regardless if it's, I'm really thinking about from Daniel Cormier, regardless if he wins or loses, he needs that moment when he's walking out of the cage, either with the belt over his shoulder or beat up, bloodied up, where he's high-fiving fans, hugging random people. Like, he needs that moment. He needs the moment where Joe Rogan's standing next to him saying how much of it's an honor to watch one of the greatest fighters of all time, and the whole the whole arena stands up and cheers from whether you were this huge John Jones fan and you were booing him, whether you were in Buffalo, New York at UFC 210 when he did the towel game, and every time they showed his face, they booed him like crazy. When he lost to John Jones the sixth time, I was in a bar in Richmond, Virginia, and the people were screaming and, oh, he's crying, and like all that stuff goes away when they retire, and suddenly everyone has respect. If anybody in the history of MMA probably deserves that moment, it's probably Daniel Cormier, and it really sucks that he's not going to have that. Now, as far as the good, you already mentioned the good. Once the fight actually happens, the crowd goes away. Other than that, like knockout moment, then the crowd gets back in. But hearing the instruction, get to hear, the cornerman better. Like I'm going to like that part. But it definitely is going to lessen the fight a little bit to me.
Tom, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, agreed as far as just, especially, I don't think, when it comes to Cormier's retirement, we've really had that big emotional moment yet in one of these environments. And, I do think it's going to lose something, win or lose, just the whole post-fight goings on. I would say, I noticed it the most, just the early fights, so basically from the Brazil card right before the complete shutdown happened, and then the first few cards in Jacksonville, especially during fighter intros and stuff like that. You expect that crescendo of the crowd, and it's just silence. It was very uncanny feeling. But now that it's gone into the smaller facilities, it's basically from a feelers perspective, just like the Ultimate Fighter, or the Contender Series fight, something we've experienced before. I do think it's hurt. So from a watching the fight standpoint, I don't think it's hurt much. It's been a different experience, obviously. I think back to the Glover Teixeira Anthony Smith fight. Just you get these moments of, or Max Rothkopf and everything. Just it kind of lays raw a lot of the hard emotions of this sport, which is compelling in its own way. But I feel too it has sort of dulled the highs in terms of, I think, not having, different locations and different crowds, these runs of, even next week is called UFC Vegas 7. All the cards just start to blend together. It's you can tell why, all right, these were cards in Vegas, these were cards on Fight Island, as they kind of go back and forth. But as far as what happened when it all muddles together, and I think back to that also hurts, as far as a legacy standpoint, fights Dustin Poirier, Dan Hooker, Josh Emmett, Shane Burgos. I mean, there are probably 2 or 3 fights in the moment where hey, okay, this is awesome. But just, since it's become even more homogenized than usual, that it's okay, on to the next numbered Vegas card. I think when we look back on this, it's gonna, just all blend together from a legacy standpoint. So I'm actually kind of curious to see how this all plays. I mean, obviously, win or lose is going to be huge for Cormier as far as, if it's, I almost think in a way it'll be more powerful, if he loses just with the barren environment. This is kind of how he went out. But it's going to be interesting to see. I think this is the first sort of big emotional test when it comes to these post-pandemic cards.
Excellent. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and dig into what is, as of this taping on Thursday evening, an 11-fight card. We did lose the light heavyweight matchup between Yohan Kudalaba and Magomed Ankalaev, the rematch of their 90 seconds of madness a couple months ago. Probably were saved another 90 seconds of madness and something weird happening. But nonetheless, let's power on. Our first match of the evening is featherweights. Kai Kamaka III takes on Tony Kelly in a matchup of debuting UFC fighters. Kamaka is 7-2, has fought in Legacy Fighting Alliance as well as Bellator, and the Hawaiian is on a 5-fight winning streak, has fought on the last 2 Bellator cards in Hawaii, incidentally. And he takes on Tony Kelly. Kelly is 5-1, has fought once in the last 4 years. So in a fight between one man who has fought once in the last 4 years and one man who fought 2 weeks ago, we're seeing that in this era of the coronavirus, the UFC is really filling its cards with whoever they can find. And that is not detracting from either of these men. They're both going to have the chance to prove that they are UFC material and then some, but the UFC is clearly putting together cards out of what they can find. Let's start with you, Keith. Who wins between Kai Kamaka and Tony Kelly, and how?
Yeah, so I want to jump off a point you just said about they'll take pretty much anybody. If you're a middling, like almost UFC level fighter, there's certain management group, you kind of connect them all. There's one certain management group who keeps getting all their late notice guys in. So I don't want to throw them under the bus, but if you're in that mid one, go get hired by, join that management group because you're probably going to get in. This is a fight, like you said, it's a late edition, so this is one I probably didn't do as much video analysis as I usually like. Kamaka, as you mentioned, he's Hawaiian. He trains with Ray Cooper. He's pretty well rounded. He does that high guard, very tight high guard, which I really like. He varies his attacks. One thing that Ben is probably so sick of hearing me saying is I love people who throw power to the body, and that's something I really noticed from Kamaka. Hooks, heap kicks, step in knees. Shout out to my old buddy Dave Chicken Palm Stewart. We used to always get excited when we saw a step in knee. He's got a pretty solid chin. He's strong. He likes to get in the clinch. He can with little short elbows in there. He has a collegiate wrestling background. Some nice takedowns. Though he has been taken down by weaker wrestlers. And in one fight that I saw, he slowed down really great, but it was a really high output fight. So it was kind of understandable as both guys got really tired. As far as Tony Kelly, I just watched his fight against Kevin Aguilar. Check that fight out. That fight was an absolute war. The guy's a massive for the weight class. He's huge. Has incredible heart. Kevin Aguilar hit him with everything. He just kept going. Very aggressive. He hits hard. He wants a brawl. He kind of reminds me of like a Tim Means, like tall, lengthy, like weird elbow and stuff. But and it's going to be a bloody affair. The thing I didn't like is that he's a really weak wrestler and grappler. Like he would shoot takedowns from really far away, and Aguilar would take his back easily. Like you mentioned, he hasn't fought in 4 years, and I would have said that the way you might be able to beat Kamaka is to gas him out. But when you you only fought once in 4 years, and the other guy fought 2 weeks ago, I would assume that right now Kamaka would probably have the deeper gas tank. But who knows in the pandemic what kind of training Tony Kelly's doing. I'm going to go with Kamaka. I'm going to say he gets a couple takedowns, maybe land some ground and pound. I'm going to say he gets a second-round TKO for the Hawaiian. I feel like I should say, like in this matchup, sorry to interrupt, I know you were jumping there, but I feel like I should say whether they're going to get a contract now to the UFC. Like I feel like I'm breaking down a Contender Series matchup.
Oh, and what I should have led with and will for the remainder of the fights is that coming into this fight, Kamaka is a moderate favorite. You can get him as good as minus 175, while Kelly, clearly the lesser known quantity at this point, you can get him as high as plus 170. With that in mind, how do you feel about this fight, Tom?
I will say, compared to some fights we may get to, I feel this one is a Contender Series level fight in a good way, especially looking at Tony Kelly's record going in and kind of wondering, all right, where did they find the guy that, only fought once in the last 4 years? I was pleasantly surprised. I did watch that Kevin Aguilar fight and did really I was like, okay, this is a fight I could at least see sticking in someone's mind down the line as far as, hey, maybe this is a guy we, watch out for, even though he didn't fight for another 3.5 years, basically. I did like how, knowing now about Aguilar and just his style as a very plotting counterpuncher, I did like how Kelly navigated sort of, trying to be intelligently aggressive, darting in and out, and trying not to be there, when Aguilar would throw back. Although, again, and I'll like Keith said, just the wrestling, just the grappling and wrestling was just not impressive, and particularly so is one fight in the ensuing 4 years against Andy Brossett. I think I'm saying that correctly. I watched that, and his opponent wasn't a particularly outstanding athlete. I believe they said they took it on basically 1 or 2 days notice, and even though Kelly was able to get a guillotine choke, he got taken down immediately, which was just not a good sign for basically if anyone wants to take him down. Kamaka, just, solid, well-rounded fighter, like you said, good combination striking, some pretty strong wrestling, clinch work. Just kind of surprising he's never, I see, he only has one finish on his record, a quick submission via rear naked choke. So I'm picking Kamaka by decision just basically on pace, assuming he can wrestle, and the fact that he's probably still in fight shape. But, again, if this was a Contender Series fight, it would, this would at least fit right in a good way.
Great. And there is no dissension for me to break up there, but I do agree with the two of you. Kamaka, more of a known quantity at this point, obviously the busier fighter, considering he fought 2 weeks ago. He fits in that Hawaiian scrapper mold for sure, where when we say Hawaiian style scrapper in 2020, it does not mean the same thing it meant in 2003. This isn't just a wild man throwing hooks until somebody falls dead. He works to the body. Like his training partner, Cooper, he has a good takedown game, and arguably his ground strikes are every bit as devastating as what he's got on the feet. I don't know if he gets the finish just because I don't feel as though I know enough about Tony Kelly, but I do have him by a one-sided decision here. Moving on in the prelims, next up is a heavyweight prelim. There is nothing we love better than a heavyweight prelim. We have Chris Daukaus, older brother of UFC middleweight Kyle Daukaus, against Parker Porter. Daukaus is 30 years old. He is 6-1 in the last 5 years of fairly sporadic fighting. The one loss coming to Bellator and Dana White's Contender Series veteran Azuna Mwanyu. While Porter is 35 years old, 9-5 in a very sporadic career as well. But we were talking about a man who has been fighting long enough that he has some early career matches buried way down in the record against the likes of UFC light heavyweight champ John Jones and former heavyweight title challenger Gabriel Gonzaga. He has been fighting very sporadically over his career. Again, he's 9-5 since 2004. He is 3-1 since coming back from a couple of years of absence in November of 2018. So maybe that's a better indicator of where he is right now. As of right now, they are fairly close to a pick'em. You can get a little bit of plus money on Daukaus. He's as high as plus 105 a couple places, where Porter is hovering around minus 20 or minus 125. Tom, who do you have in this heavyweight prelim?
So there are moments when you just kind of question how far deep you are in the rabbit hole of MMA, and one of those was when this fight was announced. I immediately recognized Parker Porter as the guy that Gabriel Gonzaga fought between UFC stints in 2011, 2012. So watching tape on this, I watched Porter's last two fights first, and I was like, okay, this is decent regional heavyweight stuff. He can fight, take some abuse, fights back, enough of a wrestling game, I guess. It was like, okay, if Daukaus is a solid prospect, then I'm gonna wind up picking Daukaus. And then I watched Daukaus' film. The fight against Zhu Anyanwu was pretty instructive in my mind. His last win wasn't he looked decent, but it wasn't against really a guy of note, and just kind of his record in general as far as who he beats is fairly weak. So the Anyanwu fight, at least in my mind, counts for a lot. And first round, I'm like, okay, it's looking pretty crisp, decent clinch game, a lot of this looking really good. And then Anyanwu just stuck around and just kept fighting back, and things went off the rails really quickly, and that was the end of the fight pretty soon after that. And I think back to just in general, just doing more and more tape study, you kind of figure out heavyweight, a lot of this comes down to durability. And just being able to fight through stuff. And I always think back to the prospect in my head is that this always comes down to is Marcelo Gome, if you remember him. And I was really high on him, watching him. A lot of regional heavyweights, just kind of a crapshoot. So I watched Marcelo Gome, take out all these guys, and I was like, okay, yeah, he looks really good. And then he beat Christian Colombo, and I'm like, all right, yeah, that's really good. And then he started fighting people who fought back, and it was just things just went off the rails. So that's kind of in my mind here. Daukaus could just come out and just hit something hard and, knock Porter out. Porter isn't invincible. But I saw enough that basically if Porter can hang around for a round and then start fighting back and, do what he does, then I think he's going to take it. So I'm picking Porter by a second round. Porter by second round stoppage.
Excellent. Keith, what's your take on this one?
So yeah, this does that contender series feel to it that we were talking about earlier. I'm gonna start with Parker Porter because Parker Porter is from my area. He's a Southern New England guy. I've seen him in person many times, either at a show in attendance or fighting. So I'm gonna give you probably a bigger analysis on him because I've seen a lot more. Like you said, he's a true regional MMA fighter. He's been around forever, since all the way back to 2007. He trains at Underdog MMA, which a lot of people might not be familiar with the team, but that's the team that Jesse Mealy, who's fighting Julia Budd, she comes out of that team. Matt Bassett, who used to fight in the UFC, he's CS champion, he comes out of that one. Parker Porter is a big guy. He weighs in at 255. He does have a little bit of wrestling, as Tom says, but he's more of a striker. Not the best athlete, like not athletic at all. He loves the same combination. Like he throws a jab followed by an overhand right. He throws it a lot, and he tries knocking guys out with that overhand right. He does have power, and he has like thudding hard leg kicks. When he hits you with the leg, it's loud, it's hard, it's like it's scary. But he has huge defensive flaws. He always dips to his right, leaving open to anything coming from the left side, whether it be a kick, a hook, anything. He will just march forward and just get tagged and just kind of think his toughness, and he has a pretty good chin, will survive. And a lot of times, like I say, he just runs at you without much game plan. Dawkins, I haven't seen as much on, but he's also a very big guy, 255. I think he has pretty fast hands. He's pretty technically sound. He's probably more polished than Parker Porter is, but doesn't hit as hard. I don't think he's as mean as Parker Porter is mean in the cage. Dawkins makes a mistake of kind of like throwing one strike at a time, but that kind of paces himself instead of like Porter, who kind of like lets it all go right out the window. He throws a high kick a lot and doesn't land it that often. So this fight to me is about 50-50 as they come. Neither guy is very promising in the UFC. Neither guy is going to win many fights in the UFC. Like this might be the peak for either one of them. Like one of them's going to win and get to say they won a UFC fight. I don't know if they're going to have many opportunities to say that. Dawkins is, if it's an outside striking match, Dawkins is going to win. If it's a brawl, chances are Porter's going to win. I should lean towards Porter because he's a fellow Southern New Englander, and I have that ties. Like I don't openly root for anybody, but you kind of secretly root. I root for people from my hometown. However, Dawkins is a Philadelphia police officer, and people who've listened to this network know that I only do this part-time. I am a full-time police officer, so I'm not going to get political, but I'm going to back my fellow blue. So I will take Dawkins, and this fight's so bad, I'm going to say it goes to a decision, on a heavyweight decision on the prelims. So I'll go Dawkins by split decision.
All right. Let the record show, and please direct your hate mail to Keith Shillan if he has now just manifested that into existence. I have probably seen less tape on these two gentlemen than Tom or Keith has, but I have watched at least one full fight by each guy, and there's nothing harder to pick than a prelims matchup between two debuting UFC heavyweights who really haven't even fought out of their region much. But give me Porter by being more aggressive early, hitting harder, and just flattening Dawkins before either of them is really warmed up. So I'm going to say not only first round knockout, but first half of the first round knockout. This is going to be over quick. Moving on, we head to the women's strawweight division and the first fight on the card to feature no debuting fighters, as Lavinia Souza and Ashley the Spider Monkey Yoder will have it out in a surprisingly high stakes strawweight matchup. Souza is 29 years old, 13-2. She is 4-1 in her last 5 fights and is a former Invicta strawweight champ. She's taking on Yoder, who is 32 years old, 7-5 overall. She's 2-4 in the UFC, and last lost to Randa Marcos just a few months back. Yoder is the slight underdog. You can get her as high as plus 145 at the time of this taping. And Souza is hovering between minus 165 and minus 180 as the favorite. Tom, who do you have in this fight?
So when this matchup first got announced, and going into my tape study, I figured, okay, Souza's probably going to be a pretty easy pick, just because, coming off the Invicta run, she was high prospect coming in the UFC, has a lot of swagger, only one loss in the UFC, while Yoder just she lost her first 3 fights in the UFC. I was kind of surprised that, the UFC held on to her in a position where they won't hold on to a lot of fighters. And just, even though she's been doing well, just kind of mentally written her off. And then just delving deeper, I've actually, just Yoder's, breakout in the last few fights has been pretty impressive. I'd say, probably her breakout performance was actually probably the loss to Mackenzie Dern, where she did a very good job of just surviving the 3 rounds, I think, in what everyone figured it was going to be a squash match. Then, win over Amanda Cooper. I'm not particularly high on Cooper, so whatever. And then just, plowing through Siri Kondo, and then taking what looked like a really tough style matchup again against Randa Marcos, taking that to a split decision loss that really could have gone either way. I thought it was impressive. And then the other side of things, so Yoder, she's kind of impressed more than my initial baseline expectations. And then Souza's been sort of the opposite. I mean, I look back to, her win, as far as her UFC career, win over Alex Chambers really quick. That was expected. And then the Sarah Froda win, being as close as it is, basically, with how bad Froda looked against Jillian Robertson after that, and just kind of showed that, okay, maybe someone just on physical power alone can start to cause a lot of problems for Souza. And then things just, I thought, went off the rails against Brianna Van Buren. Just someone she couldn't overpower, someone who could just control her to an extent on the mat. And then, I mean, Souza's striking, I know she has some knockouts, but it just, when things go wrong, it looks wild in all the worst ways. I mean, she can get a knockout, but it's a train careening wildly out of control. So it's looking at, Yoder's record and seeing that, okay, she's become, a stronger striker. I mean, her grappling is still, I think, her focus, the basis of her game. But looking at, okay, she's been able to survive on the ground where, she's a pretty physically strong strawweight, I would say. And just, she should be able to outbox those on the feet. And just looking at all that, I'm kind of surprisingly, I think, maybe taking kind of a flyer and saying that Yoder is just going to survive and get a decision win.
Keith, agree or disagree?
I don't know. Yeah, I heard Tom take Yoder. I apologize for that. So I was getting distracted for a second. Yeah, Yoda's made some big improvements since her days on Tough. You go back to that Marcos battle. I mean, it was a close fight, and just to say she had a close matchup against Randa Marcos is way more than I would have expected from her going back to those Tough days. I mean, she's a southpaw, and she throws a lot of kicks because she's big and she likes to use her range. She doesn't really give much out in the boxing world. She keeps her chin kind of straight up in the air. She should have a big size advantage over Souza. I mean, Souza probably should be an atomweight, and that's probably her best avenue where she could get in the clinch, grind her against the cage, throw in a couple takedowns, which she's done in the past. One thing I don't like is that she tries that dumb head and arm throw. I don't know why others other than probably Michelle Waterson should go for it because it doesn't work often. If she does get on top, she kind of has a controlling top game. Randa Marcos had to work to get off the bottom. Though she herself, when she was on bottom, she really struggled to get up. And was almost subbed many times. She's been subbed in the past. Go over to Souza. Souza's the younger fighter, so I definitely like that. She's well-rounded. She switches stances a lot, though she's probably better in the orthodox stance. Got a nice jab, though I don't like her. She she does a high guard, but what she does is she ducks behind the hands a lot and does like your classic boxing thing, and that works when you have big gloves. But it's the Tito move, and it never really worked out, and I don't like that. And she does that, and she backs against the cage, and Brianna Van Buren was having a field day with her with that. As far as she's got a pretty good wrestler. She advances position when she hits the ground. She's a BJJ black belt. Has some, she's a serious threat from both top and bottom. But she's undersized. She can be bullied. And the thing that really concerns me about Souza, going back to her days in Invicta, when she was the Invicta champion, I don't know if she's improved much since then. Like she doesn't look better than she did when she was in Invicta. And I don't like that. I don't see a lot of change in her game plan. Like when she fought Brianna Van Buren, she wanted an outside, slow-paced kickboxing matchup. And when Brianna Van Buren wasn't having that, and she kept charging her, like crashing the pocket, she made no adjustment, no lateral movement, no nothing. She added a couple wrestling, but it was like a little too late before she got it going. I didn't like that. As far as this pick goes, I'm really torn because Yoda was someone I wasn't high on before, who I've been like, wow, she's gotten better. And then Souza was someone I was high on, and I'm like, wow, she has not gotten better. So that's why it's a really close matchup. If you asked me 2 years ago, I would have been like, oh my God, this is a showcase fight for Souza. When I think about Yoda, though, I said, did she look good against Marcos, or did Marcos just really look bad? Did Marcos have an off night? And even in an off night, she still beat Yoda. Like I said, Yoda has a size advantage, and she could just big sister her, like kind of just pick her up and throw her around the cage. That said, I still think Souza's technically better everywhere. So I think she wins. I think it's going to be close. I think she's going to edge a decision. I think she'll get some takedowns. So I'm going to go the opposite of Tom. And I'm going to go with Souza by, we'll say, unanimous decision.
All right. In that case, it falls to me to break the tie. I'm actually leaning here in the direction of the slight underdog, Yoder. What I've learned from Souza, and honestly, I echo what both of you have said here, where Souza has disappointed a bit from the expectations that she carried into the UFC with her, whereas Yoder looked like she was headed for the door and has looked better in her last several fights, win or lose. The problem I see with Souza is that, as both of you have alluded, she can be bullied. She's at her best when she is the physically stronger and more athletic fighter. I mean, we're talking about someone who completely blew Ayaka Hamasaki, the best atomweight in the world, out of the water. When she doesn't have that advantage in just brute strength, size, athleticism, she suffers. Van Buren was able to crush the pocket on her pretty much at will. And I think that Yoder, just by virtue of being as much bigger as she is and not being a weakling, this fight is going to take place where and at the distance that Yoder wants it. And that's a recipe for a 3-round decision for the Spider Monkey. I think she gets it done. Unanimous decision. Probably not real appointment viewing, but one fighter survives, advances, moves up. The other takes the loss. Next up, we are back in the featherweight division, where we are going to see TJ Brown and Danny Chavez. Brown is 30 years old, 14-7 in his professional career. He won a UFC roster spot on Dana White's Contender Series last August. He lost his debut to Jordan Griffin. Chavez is 33 years old, and he is another of those fighters that we've already discussed a couple of on this card that's fought very sporadically. He is 10-3 in a career that dates all the way back to 2010, and he has a couple of at least 2-year hiatuses on his record. He fought just 4 weeks ago in the Miami area, had been gone for a year and a half before that, and then had another absence of over a year just shortly before that. Nonetheless, he is on a 3-fight winning streak for his UFC debut. He is the slight underdog, sitting around plus 125, 135, whereas Brown is, the best you can get on him right now is about minus 150. Keith, who do you have in this matchup of young featherweight prospects?
Well,
in their
first of all,
30s.
let's talk about let's talk about TJ Brown. So he has a mullet, so you got to like that. Like that's always a if you're on a if you're on the fence, you don't know who to pick, go with the mullet. So going back to when I did the breakdown of him for the Contender Series, he's much better than a 14-7 record would indicate. He's your classic wrestle boxer. Has a nice crisp jab, nice straight right, throws a lot of kicks. He can land in all areas of the body. He has a great head kick knockout on the regional scene. That's really fun one to watch. He can be a little overconfident though in the stand up. He'll start dropping his hand, leaning his chin out a little bit, and it's really surprising these overconfident because it seems like he gets rocked in every single fight. I mean, even in his fight in Contender Series, his fight in his last fight, he gets hit. He's a very solid wrestler, though. He has a nice reactionary double. He chains takedowns to get together well, which shows really high level. Like a lot of times, like a lot of people, like Jandaroba has like a nice, good double, but can they get in and then turn the corner like that? TJ Brown does, because usually that first initial shot is not going to get a good wrestler, but it's the second and third one, and he does that really well. He also will catch kicks and just use that for a takedown. Good top control, kind of a. I like that he mixes up both striking and submission. Like he's not one or the other. He has good ground and pound, but he has 9 submission wins on his record. His like go-to move is that head, your classic wrestling head and arm triangle choke. What I don't like is that he'll give up position to drop down in a heel hook, which or some kind of leg lock, knee bar, some kind of thing. I definitely don't like that. As far as Chavez, as I seem like every breakdown I do, I say there's always one fighter that is hard to find film on, and Danny Chavez is definitely that one. Even though he's 33, I think he trains at MMA Masters, which is a good team to train out of. He's the reigning Golden Legion champion, whatever that means. From film I've seen, he throws a lot of kicks, both high and low. Has some offensive wrestling in himself. But one fight I saw, and actually one fight I saw, it was a highlight video. In his highlight video, he was gassing. So that's not a good sign. So if you're a guy who throws a lot of kicks against TJ Brown, that's something that TJ Brown likes to catch, and you have wrestling, but TJ Brown's probably a better wrestler. I expect Chavez to rock TJ Brown because Brown gets rocked in every single fight. But I think Brown will recover, get some takedowns, and probably get a submission himself. So give me Brown. I'll double down and say I'm going to take Brown. I'm going to take him by the head and arm triangle choke in the second round. But I'm not very confident because I haven't seen that much of Chavez.
Not very confident as he calls the round, the method, and the specific technique. we see you here, Keith. Tom, what do you got?
Just kind of funny. It's like I'm not confident either, but I arrived at the exact same conclusion. So TJ Brown, usually have a pretty good read on who Dana White's going to sign, but I was surprised he got a contract on the Contender Series. I didn't think his win was overwhelming enough, but he's a fun fighter, and he's lived up to that with the Jordan Griffin fight. That was a really good one, and just I do like his constant aggression, for better or for worse on the feet, and especially with the wrestling submission game. Chavez, again, really hard to find footage on. I found one good quality, fight of any relevance, and that was his fight against Felipe Vargas in 2018. There was a pretty good, I know there was some fan cam out there, but there was a pretty good, more professional video with on the MMA Masters Facebook page, with I believe on Blake Bowman. I was on commentary of all people. Anyway, there's the blast from the past. But and yeah, basically same note, just throws a lot of kicks, and the Vargas fight was basically just, a guy who gave him the opportunity to kind of set up and throw those kicks one at a time. Like you said, Brown, gets rocked, immediately in almost every fight. So there's a pretty good chance Chavez is going to hit him with one of those kicks early on. But I came to the same conclusion that throwing all those kicks against someone as aggressive as Brown is probably more likely to get him taken down and let Brown get his cane wrestling game going. So same pick, Brown by second round submission.
I'm going to make it unanimous. I think Brown's got this one. The limited amount of film I was able to find on Chavez, he's clearly a schooled kickboxer. In fact, I don't know this for a fact, but his long absences from MMA, those gaps, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he had filled those with some kickboxing or even some boxing. He does rely heavily on the kicks. I think that's going to cost him against Brown. I was impressed with Brown on the Contender Series, and to a certain extent, I was even impressed with him in the fight against Griffin. That fight was just like a demolition derby. The first round was a wild one. I thought Brown got slightly the better of just the Tasmanian Devil, Rabid Wolverine exchanges, both on the feet and on the ground. Then that end was just terrible. Griffin had the out of position guillotine that ends up in getting you in a Von Flue choke most of the time, but managed not just to finish it from there, but actually choke Brown all the way out. That kind of porousness and susceptibility will definitely keep Brown out of the upper echelons of the division. But here, I do think he's going to find a way to get Chavez on the ground and either tap him out or pound him out in the first or second round. The prelims will now bring us right back to the strawweight division, where we have Verna Jandiroba against the returning Felice Herrig. Jandiroba is 32 years old, 15-1 in her career. Her only loss was this April to Carla Esparza, former strawweight champ. Whereas Herrig is 35 years old, is returning to the sport after almost 2 full years away due to injury and due, at least in part, to her own stated discontent with the sport and with her career. She's been very vocal for years now about her pay, her level of celebrity, her performances. So we could be forgiven for thinking she might be done with the sport entirely, but nonetheless, she is back. Herrig is 14-8 overall and exited the sport in 2018 on a 2-fight skid, though against high-level competition in Michelle Waterson and Karolina Kowalkiewicz. Before that, she had been on a 4-fight winning streak in the UFC strawweight division over some decent names, including Courtney Casey and Alexa Grasso, who are still in the division now. If you look at the odds for this one, Jandiroba is one of the higher favorites on the entire card. In fact, she may be the highest favorite on the entire card. The best you can get on her is about minus 280 right now. Whereas with Herrig, if you are interested, you can get her as high as plus 265. Tom, do you agree with the odds makers? Does Jandiroba have this one in the bag?
I do not. I mean, it's rare that, after I write up my previews, I just like to look at the odds to kind of see, I don't change my picks based off it, but just mentally to kind of see where I am, versus the consensus. And usually it's pretty close, or I can see some logic where, okay, if someone's what I feel to be a not necessarily high favorite, that may be because they're a high prospect or something like that. So this is one of the few rare ones that shocked me, because I think, it's at worst, a close fight. Even then, I'll not to give it away, but I'll be picking Herrig. But I could obviously see the pick for Jandiroba, but just to see her as that high of a fight favorite just surprises me. I do know, I like what she did in Invicta. Showed a lot there, and Carla Esparza was pretty much the worst possible, I think, debut opponent for her. As far as something realistic within the division, just because Jandiroba, A, B, and C is her grappling and wrestling game, and Esparza is one of the few people that could match and control her there. And then, she took care of business against Mallory Martin, like I thought she would. Herrig is a lot harder to figure out, even on top of the 2-year layoff because of the torn ACL and, everything else. She came back from her last long break and looked really good against Alexa Grasso, Justine Kish, really strong performances there. The Courtney Casey fight was a little bit of a weird one. Thought she looked good against Kowalkiewicz even in a loss, although now with the slide Kowalkiewicz is being, gone on, I'm not sure kind of where all that aligned. And then she looked fairly flat against Waterson. So it's, the question of, okay, how's she going to look here? Is the 2 years off going to rejuvenate her in some aspect? Does she figure something out mentally, or is this going to be another flat performance on sort of her way out the door? Which makes this one of the harder fights to call. And again, something where I'm surprised that, the betting public seems to have so much confidence in Jandiroba to that overwhelming of a degree. I'm going to just fade Jandiroba here as sort of, I'm not She's a decent wrestler. I'm not super high on her wrestling, and without the wrestling, I don't think there's a way to obviously just have that submission game. And I'm also not particularly high on Jandiroba as a striker, so I'm just going to call for Herrig to at least do enough to keep this, or even just be powerful enough to just keep this fight on the ground and stay out of danger and basically stop Jandiroba from going to a Reggae game. And then from that point, I just kind of have to pick Herrig by decision. Although this is something where the variance here, especially on how Herrig is going to look, is so wild that this is possibly my least confident pick on the card.
Thank you. Keith, Jandiroba versus Herrig. How do you see this one playing out?
Yeah, so I mean, I get where Tom said that this is his least confident pick, but it's hard to have confidence in Felice Herrig. Like you already said, she's 35 years old. She's coming off a 2-year layoff. I think she had a torn ACL and reconstructed knee. But even before that, there's really nothing to get too excited about. I mean, like she's like the definition of lukewarm. Like if she was a male, she would have to fight in the middleweight division because she just fits it. Like she's so like Chris Camozzi.
That's literally who I was going to say.
Yeah, because that he's the stereotype like middleweight. Like she's like how many good wins does Felice Herrig have? I mean, she beat Alexa Grasso. Like that's probably her best win. And even that was a close decision. It wasn't fantastic. She's an outside kickboxing game. She tends to throw one strike at a time. Doesn't really cut angles. Kind of like I watched the Michelle Waterson fight. She just kind of followed her around, fell right into her game plan. She's physically strong. Like she definitely has that, and like she's ripped. The clinch is probably her best position, where she can get some little bit of dirty boxing. Tries to go for a takedown. She's a decent offensive wrestler, though a pretty weak defensive wrestler. But she really struggles from the bottom. Take that over to Jandiroba, former Invicta champion. Her stand-up is ugly. I mean, her hands are slow. She has no head movement. But on the flip side, she's a master on the ground. Like I'm much higher on her ground game than I think Tom is. I think she has nice level changes, nice drop step. She also has a judo background, so she's got like a trip game, so occasional throws. She advances in position, like you see her consistently working, inching, a little bit at a time. I think she's a serious submission threat, slick back takes. She will give up a takedown herself, which I don't like because she's so confident off her back. That's probably the one area. I guess if Herrig stops takedowns, she could win a kickboxing game. And I definitely think the line should be much closer than Jandiroba. Like the betting line I wrote down in my notes was -320 was the best I found for Jandiroba. Now that was yesterday, so it could obviously you already mentioned it's down to 280. So I definitely think the line should be closer. But I expect Jandiroba to get Herrig down pretty easily. I think she's gonna wear her down and eventually get a submission. Herrig is tough, so I think she lasts pretty far. But I'm gonna take Jandiroba. I'm gonna say 3rd round submission.
All right. Looking at this one, both of you have already laid it out there, but the biggest problem is that we have no idea what version of Felice Herrig is going to enter the octagon on Saturday. If this were 3 or 4 months after Herrig's last fight, rather than almost 2 years, I'd call this close to a pick'em because Jandiroba is exactly the kind of higher ranked, more skilled fighter that Herrig can sneak up and beat. And Jandiroba's one loss, which was to Carla Esparza, is a game plan that Herrig could follow. Esparza, managed to take Jandiroba down and avoid the submission. I mean, the 2 rounds that Esparza won against Jandiroba were the first and the third. And in both those rounds, she took her down early and often, and she got swept a few times, but did not get put in any serious danger of the submission. Herrig at her best could pull off something like that. I don't know if I'd favor her to do so, but not knowing what version of her we're going to get, I think this is Jandiroba's fight to lose. I think if Herrig takes her down, she's not going to be able to keep up. And if Herrig wants to keep it standing, there's no guarantee that she'll be able to keep it on the feet. Jandiroba has that Damian Maia thing. I mean, that's who she likes to compare herself to, where she has other ways to get the fight to the ground than just a single or double leg shot American style. You know, she's good at back take standing. She's good at little trips and throws from the clinch. Herrick's never been submitted, and she's been on the ground with some pretty good people, so I'm not going to go with a pick to see something I've never seen before here, but I think Jandiroba wins a pretty easy decision and dominates on the ground. With that, we will move on to the featured prelim with two very contrasting career stories in the UFC lightweight division. We have Jim Miller, who is the UFC's career leader in everything that Donald Cerrone is not the leader in, taking on Vince Pichel, who, despite being in the UFC for 8 years and actually being older than Miller, is only 12-2 in his career. Miller is 32-14 with 1 no contest, and his career has been declared dead and then resurrected many times over the span of his career. A decade ago, he might have been one of the 3 best lightweights in the sport. Less than 5 years ago, he was mired in a 4-fight losing streak. He struggled with Lyme disease that has affected every aspect of his life, including, obviously, his performances in the cage. But he comes into this fight having armbarred a promising prospect in Roosevelt Roberts, and really having looked pretty good in all of his all of his fights in the last year or two, win or lose. His loss to Scott Holtzman was a close affair. His loss to Charles de Bronx Oliveira, really no shame in that. Against him is Pichel, who, as I've alluded, has been a professional fighter for over a decade, yet has only 14 fights under his belt. And since arriving in the UFC 8 years ago, he's fought basically an average of about once per year due to a litany of injuries, both fighting related and not. He's had motorcycle crashes. He's had injuries that required surgery. But when he's been in the cage, he's been very impressive. He is currently 5-2 in the UFC, with the only losses coming to Rustam Habilov in his UFC debut, where he got suplexed onto his noggin, and then against the then undefeated Gregor Gillespie, where he succumbed to a second-round arm triangle choke. Pichel is just my moderate favorite here. He is around -130, -135, where Miller, if you want to put money on him, can be gotten as good as +118. Tom, who do you have in this lightweight contest?
So, it's hard to tell when it comes to Pichel, an unintentional rhyme there. It's a very clear dynamic as far as okay, the 2 strongest wrestlers / grapplers that he's fought, Gillespie and Kabilov, he's lost to cleanly. And for the purposes of this, he's evolved as a striker. But I think as far as the dynamic, as far as how Miller is going to win this, it basically is going to come down to that clinch and grappling game. And the strongest, at least of his UFC career, Pichel, the strongest win in that part of things came against Roberts, who I actually picked Pichel heading into that fight just because Roberts, had his own issues as far as being, having a test against opponents as physical and, large as he is. So Miller obviously is on the other side of things when it comes to experience. And Miller, he looks solid in the Holtzman fight, but it's become a pretty clear dynamic over the last few years that as far as actually getting wins, it's basically the quick finish or nothing. And so I expect these two, especially with the small cage, to lock horns pretty quickly, especially in a grappling wrestling situation. And Pichel, having not really faced another stiff veteran grappler, is okay. Does Miller just, get in there, either take over on that aspect of the game or get a quick submission, and that's a wrap. And that's basically Miller's path to victory. I'm gonna basically, since I trust Pichel to be a more consistent 3-round fighter, and Miller, I think, only has basically an effective, 5 or 6 minutes left in him at this point, I'm gonna pick Pichel to stay, basically show that young whippersnapper Jim Miller what's what. But it's again, this is a fight where just as easily that Miller could just come out and prove basically like, okay, Pichel's a good prospect test, but there are levels to this, and that he's a much better fighter. My pick is still basically the Pichel to survive the early going, stay big, stay tough, and coast to decision win.
Great. Keith, how do you feel about this one?
So there's a lot of surprises. I don't know if I'm more surprised that Vince Pichel has won 5 out of his last 6 fights, or that Jim Miller is actually the younger fighter in the matchup. Like, both very surprising to me. I'm not going to do a lot of analysis on Jim Miller. I mean, like, I think he's breaking the record again for most appearances in the UFC. We know what we have with Jim Miller. He's not a great athlete, but he's still pretty technically sound. He clearly has lost a step or two over the years. As Tom has already mentioned, his cardio is probably completely shot at this point. But he still has a good chin. I mean, Dan Hooker is the only one who has knocked him out in recent history. He's a solid wrestler. He's never been an elite wrestler. Not a guy like you mentioned, like Gregor Gillespie, but he's solid. He can get his takedowns. He's definitely a strong grappler. He is a submission threat. He has that dangerous guillotine and stuff. You go over to Vince Pichel. He's been out so long and been so inactive. Like you mentioned, some of his things that have happened. Like one thing, he got hurt being a tow truck driver, which is kind of funny that a UFC fighter has to be a tow truck driver on the side. And I don't know how he got hurt, but I did an interview with him years ago when it was his first fight back after like 5 years off. And he mentioned that's how he got hurt. He marches forward. He uses a lot of feints, but he's slow. Like he fits his age. Like he's slow. He's flat-footed. He's never been very athletic. He's very limited offensively. Like he's very limited with his boxing skills. Besides probably leg kicks, that's probably his only really good stand-up skill. But he's a grinder. Like he's gonna want to get to the clinch. He's gonna try to use his strength, his old man strength, where he's very physically strong. He'll throw in a takedown, but it's not a powerful like drive through your hips. It's like push you against the cage, chest to chest, eventually try to work his way, drop it down, either single or high crouch, stuff like that. If he's taken down, he does do well to work his way back to his feet, where on the feet, he's stupid tough. Like he's a guy that he'll keep coming forward. He's gonna bring the fight nonstop. So that's why it's a really, really hard pick. This is the one I flip-flopped on 2 fights a lot. This is one of them. They remind me of each other in the sense that they're both overachievers based on like they've done better than that. Like when I watch their skill sets. But this fight comes down to me is what does Jim Miller have left? I definitely think he's more talented. He should win the first round. I think Pichel is super tough and he presses hard. And if he goes into the third round, he should win the third round. So who wins the second round? Now, Tom says that Miller probably has 6 minutes in him, and I think that's a very good analysis. But I'm hoping he has 7.5 or 7 minutes and 31 seconds left in him, where he can win win the first half of the second round and gets it. I know it hasn't happened in a while, but I'm actually think it's going to go to decision based on how tough Pichel is. I think it's going to be one of those ones where we're all going to MMA decisions afterwards to see who wins. People will be fighting on Twitter. I think it's going to be a bloody affair based on what Pichel does. I'm going to go with Miller, but I'm not confident at all. But give me Miller I'll go split decision.
All right. I see the dynamic exactly the same way you two do, so I won't rehash any of that. You've already said it better than I can. Looking at these 2 possible outcomes, I do favor Miller to win in the early going, but not have enough to win the second round, probably loses the third and loses a decision. Just blunting a little of that late career momentum he's got going on. With that, we move on to our 5-fight main card of UFC 252. And we start off in the bantamweight division as another grizzled veteran in John Dodson takes on the relative up-and-comer in Merab Dvalishvili. Dodson is 35 years old, one of the longest-standing mainstays of Jackson Wink MMA. He is 21-11 in his career and has gone from being a dazzling bantamweight prospect to one of the 4 or 5 best flyweights in the world, and now to being an occasionally dazzling bantamweight veteran once again. In his most recent fight back in February, he took on Nathaniel Wood, flashed a little bit of that early career power in absolutely icing Wood in the opening exchanges of the 3rd round. Before that, he had lost close and frankly frustrating decisions to Peter Yan and Jimmy Rivera, which, as losses go, are not too embarrassing. They are among the best of the best. He also has a win over Pedro Munoz and a narrow split decision loss to Marlon Moraes, filling out his last 5 fights. Well, Dvalishvili is one of the hottest up-and-comers in the bantamweight division. He came in to the UFC back in 2017, promptly lost his first 2 fights to Frankie Saenz and Ricky Simon, which, again, looking back at how those guys have panned out, pretty forgivable losses. And then since then, he's been on a 4-fight tear over Terrion Ware, Brad Katona, Casey Kenny, and most recently Gustavo Lopez back in June. Dodson is a pretty substantial underdog. He is hovering around plus 200 on most of your sports books, while Dvalishvili is minus 250, as good as minus 225. Keith, who do you have in this pivotal bantamweight matchup?
Yeah, so this is a hard fight to pick. The only thing I know that'll happen, like Merab's going to shoot for a lot of takedowns, and I know that John Dotson's going to get hit in the balls in this fight. Like, those things are going to happen. You mentioned John Dotson, 35. I don't think he gets enough credit. Like, he's not a world champion. He'll never be at that level anymore. But to be in the top 15 when you're 35 at 135, like, that's quite an accomplishment. And his losses, you mentioned his losses are just studs. I mean, 2 of his losses to Demetrius Johnson. They pull back the curtain on the Sherdog land. Nobody's a bigger supporter of Demetrius Johnson than I am. I'm the only one. I keep fighting for him in the rankings. He's lost to Petrian, the current champion, John Lineker, Marlon Moraes, Jimmy Rowe. These guys are all studs. I mean, and you think about it, the John Lineker and Marlon Moraes, people think he won that fight. You can make a strong argument that he won those. And he fights similar to another ageless one in Yoel Romero. And what I mean by that is he's a counter striker who fights in like spurts and blitzes, which is something that Romero does. And when he does decide to attack, he like runs in a straight line and throws combos, and then he jumps back out. Like, he's in, jump back out. He still has power. As you mentioned, he knocked out Nathaniel Wood, which was a very good win. Though he was getting tattooed and destroyed on the feet by Peter Yan, he did drop Peter Yan in the fight. Like, almost knocked out the current champion. I don't know how hurt Yan went, but I mean, he did drop briefly. Dotson always been known for his elite hand speed. I do think that is slowing down, and I think that was a little evident in the Jimmy Rivera fight. He didn't like the pressure that Yan put on him, and he backed away towards the cage and was kind of doing a little bit of Tyron Woodley fighting on the outside of that black line, which I didn't like. And then in the Jimmy Rivera, another thing he did that I really didn't like the Jimmy Rivera fight was there for him to win, and his low output just gave the fight to Jimmy Rivera. He's always been a good wrestler, though he was always hardly ever used it. Even this guy wrestled in college, just doesn't use it. But he has a tremendous takedown defense. Like Jimmy Rivera, Jimmy Rivera shot a great double leg, was in deep, in Dotson just high hipped over and then threw it a whizzer and got out, and it was really, really impressive. Which turns to Merab, because Merab is all about a takedown. Now, first of all, before I talk about Merab, I want to throw out. Can I throw some shout outs real quick? Is that allowed? Can I do some shout outs? First of all, I want to shout out the guy who was the guest on the last Roundtable, and that's Craig Allen and his Matt Serra. If you got to check out Craig Allen Fight Night Picks, his Matt Serra impression where he goes, "Come on, Merab!" I can't do it like Craig, but Craig does it. Craig Allen of Fight Night Picks, he does it fantastic. So shout out to Craig. Also, shout out to Marcel Doff, who is a part of Loudmouth. He does the breakdown show. He always mentions this, and I got to back him up. Merab Dvalishvili should be 6-0 in the UFC. He should have beat Frankie Saenz. That was a clear decision for him. It shouldn't have been a split decision. And I still don't even understand what happened that Ricky Simone fight. He won that fight. I don't know, but it's a big step in competition for him. But it's the appropriate step, and that's what I'm going to say about another fighter picking a step up in competition. On the feet, Merab throws hard everything. Like he doesn't know. He's the opposite of like we always talk about elite fighters will feel it out and they won't show their power away. That's not Rob. Rob throws power right away. He has this reckless abandoning, spinning attacks, hard kicks, winging punches. But that could be a problem because when you do that, it leaves you open for a counter. He does this flying kick, but he uses it. He'll jump in the air to kick, but he usually does that just to try to close distance, kind of like some guys would do like a Superman punch. Like they do Superman to close this. He does it with a flying kick. He's relentless with his takedowns. Closes this as well. Insane cardio. Like does not stop. He's going to go 100 miles an hour for 15 minutes straight. If he gets a takedown, he's smothering. He kind of has an old school wrestling style, like a Mark Coleman or Mark Kerr or one of these guys, where he wants to sit in the guard or wants to sit in the half guard, where he thinks that controls the opponent. And I think there's a good strong argument to that. Like if you go to ground and pound, that's probably the position better than trying to go to side control where guys can hip out. Good, hard, brutal ground and pound. This is a fun fight. This is a hard fight. This is another one that I've been flip-flopping. The odds should be a lot closer. Like this should be, to me, it should be a pick-up fight. And I think it's a fun fight because it's so intriguing. John Dodson needs to, and I know I'm going way too, I don't know why I'm going so deep in analysis on this one fight, but John Dodson needs to hold his ground. If he wants to win, he needs to not back up. He needs to hold his ground and throw his power and throw. He has a speed advantage. And he's not going to be able to match Merab's output, but it can't be a 2-1, 3-1 output. It's got to be closer to 1.5 to 1, 1 1/3 to 1. Like it can't be this huge. And if he can match that crazy style, he could win because he does have an advantage on the feet, and he's very hard to take down. Merab's going to take him down. It's just going to happen. When you shoot 30 times, you're going to get a takedown. Really close, but I'm going to take Dodson. I'm going to say Dodson. Screw it. I'm going to go big. I'm going to say Dodson knocks him out. I think Merab makes a mistake and Dodson takes him out. So I'll go with I think it's my third or fourth underdog pick. I'm going to take an underdog again. I'm going to take John Dodson by knockout. Let's do the second round.
All right. I am totally picking up what both of you are putting down here. But anytime you're analyzing a fight and you say that John Dodson will win if he throws better volume and does this strategically advisable thing, I'm pretty much out right there. I can't favor John Dodson in a fight where he has a very specific route to victory that involves him throwing more volume, because he is on my top 10 all-time list of scream at the TV fighters, where I'm screaming at him, do something, throw some punches, as he just loses to a less skilled fighter than himself.
Yeah, I know I picked that. Sorry to try. I know I picked this one wrong. It's like that one I know. Like you said this and I picked it wrong, and you're gonna be like, as soon as it ends, you're like, why did I pick John Dodson? And then 4 months from now, I'm gonna pick him again. Sorry.
I can totally see Dodson catching Merab with something and just laying waste to him in the first 3 minutes of the fight, and us going, yep, there it is. Why doesn't he do that every time? But I think what we're going to see is the whole unstoppable force, immovable object meeting when it comes to the wrestling. Dodson has, legendarily good takedown defense, but he is on the downslope of his career, and the just freakish athleticism that kind of informs that takedown defense has to be slipping out of the top gear at least a little bit. Dvalishvili is completely relentless. And I think has better cardio and a better late work rate. So even if he loses the first round, even if he gets rocked, I think he's going to start rolling downhill. He's going to get takedowns. While people can definitely get out from under him, he's a rinse and repeat type wrestler. So for Dodson to win this fight, I think he'd have to win the second and third rounds by getting out from underneath Merab enough times and punishing him. I can't see that happening. So give me the Georgian by way of Long Island by unanimous decision. Tom. Do you feel Keith's upset pick on this one, or are you going chalk like me?
I mean, dynamic-wise, I'm echoing, a lot of the things both you guys are putting down, but I actually favor Keith here. I'm going with Dodson. First of all, I would like to say I'm setting the over/under at 2.5 kicks that John Dodson's taken to the dick. And just, I always find really funny just like how Merab Dvalishvili got signed off of looking for a fight, because like the quickest way to get Dana White to sign you is to just spark somebody out, and that's exactly what Dvalishvili did with I think a 14-second spinning back fist, and it was like, surprise, you actually signed an like aggressive wrestler who, Dana White hates wrestling, so just liked him backdooring his way into the UFC that way. So like, I do like the Yoel Romero shout out when it comes to Dodson. I'm thinking in terms of, and this just popped into mind, so I may have to talk this out a little bit. Romero's fight against Paulo Costa, where I think like Dodson, when it comes to like opponents, being able to put a pace on him, like he'll gladly concede that fight at first, but when people are putting pace on him, he'll actually start. I think he'll start fighting back, and you can bring that pace out of him. Like Dodson, if left to his own devices, he'll just make things a sparring match very robust, very frustrating. Screaming at the TV like you said. But I think we've seen when fighters, when opponents can like try and make him actually work, he'll work and he'll throw, and I think that's really gonna hurt Dvalishvili here, since Dvalishvili is sort of a defensive void. When it comes to the wrestling, I mean, Dvalishvili is so aggressive with it, but just again, like you both said, just out wrestling John Dodson exclusively isn't really ever been the way to beating him, and Dvalishvili may put together these gaudy takedown totals. He's had like, I believe he's got some records as far as when it comes to 3-round UFC fights, so he's definitely in the bantamweight division. But part of that is that you're also giving up control and letting the opponent get back up and stuff like that. And I think against a much stronger wrestler like Dodson, just that this could be not quite a similar dynamic, but a similar problem, at least the Frankie Saenz fight, where, okay, Dvalishvili really got all these takedowns, but he wasn't really able to do a lot with them. And during the time the fight was on the feet, Saenz won that and was able to get the decision based off of that. So I think that's going to be the dynamic. And, Dodson just hits so much harder on the feet that I think like Dvalishvili may be able to control this fight with his wrestling, but I think in terms of actual effective offense, this is going to be Dodson's fight all the way when he throws. I'm not expecting a knockout just because like Dvalishvili's made of rocks basically. So I just think Dvalishvili is going to leave himself open, like you said, just with a lot of the wild offense, just to get hit hard a few times. That'll be enough probably to win on the scorecards. I could see this being just a really frustrating split decision where, okay, Dvalishvili controlled a lot of the fight with the wrestling but didn't get a lot done, but Dodson did a lot more damage. And when it comes to at least picks-wise, I'm going to favor the guy who does more damage, and that's going to be Dodson. So my pick is Dodson by decision.
Perfect. Next up, as we ascend the main card, we have a featherweight matchup between Herbert Burns and Daniel Pineda. Burns, the younger brother of welterweight contender Gilbert Burns, is 11-2 in his mixed martial arts career. He is on a 5-fight winning streak, the last 4 by first-round finish, the last 3 comprising his successful appearance on Dana White's Contender Series, and his 2 fights thus far in the UFC this year. He made short work of the returned Evan Dunham at UFC 250 in June, and knocked out Nate Landwehr at UFC Fight Night 166, Blades versus Dos Santos, back before the coronavirus changed the world, back in January. He is taking on Pineda, the Houston, Texas native, who is one of the most notable journeymen who makes repeat visits to top-level promotions, perhaps in the sport right now. His record stands at 26 wins, 13 losses, and 2 no contests. He's actually been on a bit of a hot streak, though. Going back 4 years, he has a loss to Georgi Karakanyan, where it was a fight he was winning and then got cut wide open by an upkick in a frankly kind of freakish outcome. Went back to the local scene in Texas, absolutely destroyed 4 people, and got an invite to Professional Fighters League last fall, where he made a fantastic showing in their playoffs. October of last year, finished off the previously undefeated Movid Khaibulaev, and then Jeremy Kennedy with a nasty guillotine in one night to punch his ticket to the finals and the possible $1 million. He was maybe the biggest story in the Professional Fighters League season last season. And then his post-fight drug test came back positive. Both of those wins were reversed to no contest, and he was out of Professional Fighters League. Now, 10 months later, he is back for what I think is his 3rd stint in the UFC. It is at least his 2nd, and he's taking on Burns. Tom Feely. Actually, let me give the odds first. As befits their relative standing and where their careers are headed right now, Burns is a substantial favorite. He is anywhere from minus 275 to minus 300, whereas the comeback on Pineda, you can get as high as plus 245. Tom Feely, who do you have?
I do have Burns, though. I like a lot of fights on this card. I do feel those odds are a bit wide. Still have a lot of questions about Burns. I mean, he's shown obviously that, super aggressive, super good submissions, obviously given his last name and his bloodlines. But just, as far as, okay, is he a multiple round fighter? Just, the striking, I think it's pretty obvious, hasn't developed anywhere near the way Gilbert's has, at least yet. Just, but what he's really good at, he's really good at. Pineda, has, I'm happy to see him back, has an aggressive approach, has some controlled aggression, I would say, just, years of being a veteran. It's relatively calm, even though, calm in his aggression. Very dangerous, everywhere. Could just wind up sparking Burns out. But basically, I think, I do have some questions, too, about Burns' wrestling, exactly how strong it is. But I think through sheer aggression, he's going to be able to find things to the mat pretty quickly. Again, if Pineda doesn't spark him out, I think it's much likelier that Burns can just eventually find something, take it to the mat, and then from there, get a submission pretty easily. If Pineda survives those first few scrambles, then things get really interesting and really difficult really quick. But more likely than that, I think it's just going to be another Burns first-round submission en route to whatever test finally derails him.
Keith Shillan, do you agree with Mr. Feely?
Yeah, I have a really hard time getting excited about Daniel Pineda. I mean, like you said, he guy's 26-13-2. He's 35. I don't think he suddenly just turned around his whole career. I know he's on counting the PFL wins, a 6-fight winning streak. But this guy's never performed at a high level other than the PFL. I mean, he's 3-4 in the UFC. He's 1-4 in Bellator. He does have a lot of experience, and I think because of that, you can kind of see where he is. He was never, a good athlete, but not great. A decent striker, but not a great striker. I think I've heard people breaking down this fight, and I think based on that Jeremy Kennedy submission, they've really exaggerated his grappling skills. He's a good grappler, but he's not an elite grappler. He's pretty good in scrambles, and he can catch a submission if you make a mistake, like Jeremy Kennedy did. But he was losing that fight. Jeremy Kennedy was controlling him. He was taking him down. He took him down a couple times. Was well on his way to winning that first round when he got caught in that guillotine. Moving over to Herbert Burns is a guy that I'm pretty familiar with because he came out the Contender Series. I try to go really in depth with the Contender Series guys. A decent boxer. I think people overlook his striking. He hits hard. He kicks hard. He kicks to the body well. He can make the mistake of looking for a brawl and just kind of winging. But he uses that brawling start to close the distance when he gets to the clinch. Though he can do a nice reactive drop step. Or even get a body lock takedown. He's. I think people. Tom mentioned that a lot of people on high on his wrestling. I like Herbert Burns' wrestling a lot, but also he will pull guard. He'll get close and just pull guard, and I think he'll even do that against someone like Pineda. We talked about. I mentioned Pineda's grappling being good. Burns' grappling is elite. Man, this guy's an IBJJF world medalist. He's that good. His back takes are super slick. His time control is awesome. He adds in striking, not just a pure looking to pass with shoulder pressure. He'll punch you in the face. The biggest issue is that he's gassed in the past. He's slowed down, and that's where Pineda can win. Pineda's going to have to survive an early flurry and try to win this late. I don't think he's going to. I think Burns is going to run through him. Like, I think Burns is going to take him down. I think he's going to beat him up. He may submit him because he's that good, but I think he'll probably ground and pound him, and I think he gets a ground and pound victory. I wrote down second round, but you know what? I'm going to go bold. I'm going to go first round. I'd say Herbert Burns takes him on the very opening round.
All right, this is the one fight on the card where I might go a little deeper than would seem to be merited by the fight that's in front of us. But for a long time, I always pretended that I didn't have favorite fighters or didn't root for particular fighters to do well. I'm past that. I don't give a shit anymore. I like Daniel Pineda. He's a local guy here in Houston. Certainly a longtime veteran of the scene here. I'm always happy to see him when his fortunes bring him back to, fight in some hall in front of me. I'm always rooting for him, when he gets a call back up to the next level. Having said that, and by the way, when you have a guy who has 26 career wins and a 100% finish rate, and those 2 no contests that were reverted were also finishes, he's here to entertain the people. Having said that, his avenues to victory here are definitely an uphill climb against Herbert Burns. He has 18 career submissions, and it's without being a Mundial's champ. It is by being strong, quick, aggressive, and well schooled on just some fundamental offensive grappling. And if Herbert Burns were anyone but Herbert Burns, he's just the kind of prospect that Pineda could stun with a punch, jump all over, and guillotine or rear naked choke. But Burns is going to be the bigger man, the rangier man. While Pineda is a dangerous striker, he's not technical to the level that he's going to have an easy time navigating Burns's reach. And even if he did hurt him with something on the feet, you don't just jump on Herbert Burns and guillotine him. So much as I'd like to say, yeah, Pineda by first round, shocking upset, I don't see it. I do, however, think he's going to give Burns some things to think about. Don't be surprised if the momentum at some point in the first 2 rounds is definitely swinging in Pineda's favor. But in the end, Burns wins 2 out of 3 rounds and survives and advances. Next up on the UFC 252 main card is a heavyweight matchup featuring former champ Junior Dos Santos taking on the once red hot and still hot prospect Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Dos Santos is 36 years old. He is 21-7 in his career. He comes into this fight on a 2-fight skid, back-to-back losses against 2 of, the top 4 fighters in the heavyweight division in Francis Ngannou and Curtis Blades. He was knocked out in both of those by Ngannou on the feet, by Blades on the ground, but before that had been on a 3-fight win streak against Derek Lewis, Tai Tuivasa, and Blagoy Ivanov. He'll be facing Rozenstruik. Biggie Boy is 32 years old, 10-1 in his career, came into the UFC just at the beginning of 2019 and had one of the great breakout years of any fighter in the UFC. He probably would have been Sherdog's breakthrough fighter of the year if not for Jorge Masvidal skyrocketing into superstardom. He showed up in the UFC and won 4 fights in 2019, all by TKO, 2 of them in under 30 seconds. And that was good enough to get him a date with Ngannou this past May at UFC 249, where just like 2 freight trains hitting head to head, something had to give, and the Frenchman knocked him out in just 20 seconds. Coming into this fight, Rozenstruik is just a slight favorite. He can be gotten as low as minus 125, while Dos Santos, you can get him as high as plus 113 right now. So fairly even odds on these two. Keith Shillan, who do you have?
Yeah, this is a fun fight. This is I think this is really good matchmaking. I'll start with the former champion JDS. He does have a lot of, he's way past his prime, but he still does some things well. He's still light on his feet. He still has good head movement, good lateral movement, nice feints. His hands have slowed a little bit, but they're still much faster than most heavyweights. He does have that. He does have a crushing uppercut, though I don't like that he leads with it. Something that they kept talking about in that Curtis Blades fight. Good kicks, something he's added on later on in his career. But all that said, I think his chin is gone. He got, think about over the years, Curtis Blades knocked him out. Francis Ngannou, hit him with like a grazing shot, knocked him out. The war against Stipe the first time, the knockout the second time, Overeem knocked him out. The second, third fight against Cain Velasquez, the amount of damage he gave him that. But what I like of him, if you see some of the pictures of him, he's coming in shredded. Like some of the pictures in his training, he looks really good. He's always had a very solid takedown defense. I mean, like, say what you want about those Cain Velasquez fights. Cain Velasquez had to work to get him down, which he won't need. He won't. I don't know why I even mentioned the takedown defense because he's not going to need it in this fight. I always like to cover everything of a fighter. He has a BJJ black belt, and he should have an advantage in the wrestling and just if he wants to go there. I mean, when Junior Albini out wrestles you, you're probably in trouble. So JDS could have that, but I think JDS is too stubborn to realize that's his best path to victory, and I think we're going to get a stand-up matchup. We go over to Jairzinho Rozenstruik. Obviously, tons of kickboxing experience. I like how loose he stays. We've talked about this in the past, and he doesn't show a lot of tells in his striking. Like he doesn't load up or anything. He throws straight down the pipe. He's very accurate counter striker. Everything comes off his jab. He really turns his hips on his leg kicks. He has crushing power. I mean, he can knock people out with jabs. I mean, he let a little shovel uppercut, just hook uppercut. Send Overeem's lip flying. He was a little gun shy early on in the Overeem fight. It took him a while to warm up, and I'm worried he could be gun shy in this one, considering his last fight was a knockout loss against Francis Ngannou. Like maybe he comes out gun shy, but I think he was gun shy based off the wrestling ability of Alistair Overeem. Alistair Overeem can wrestle, and we don't really see that from JDS. He comes from a kickboxing background, so he keeps his chin high. And I think that's a bad habit in kickboxing because they can hide behind the big gloves, and you don't have that luxury in MMA. But he's got a. I was going to say it's good because he got hit with some big shots and just walked through him until he ran into Francis Ngannou. But Francis Ngannou is a different hitter. The big and glaring weakness on Jairzinho Rozenstruik is his takedown defense is terrible. Like he's a fish out of water. I thought over when he had him down could have been a lot more aggressive, and he probably would have got him out of there. If JDS uses his ground game, he wins, and he wins fairly easily. He probably submits him or TKOs him. But I don't think he does. And I think because of that, he's going to get knocked out. I think Rozenstruik's going to knock him out in the first round with probably like the first big punch he lands. So I'll take Rozenstruik, but it's going to be one of those ones like this fight is going to be like if you pick Rozenstruik and he gets taken out and submitted, you're going to be like scratch your head like, oh, duh. But if JDS gets knocked out in the first round, it's going to be like what we do with John Dotson. Like, why did I make that pick? Oh, obviously he's going to be stubborn and get knocked out. So I'm going to go with Rozenstruik. I'm pretty confident he knocks out JDS in the first round.
Tom, what is your take on this one?
So, good call, because when you mentioned, before when you're talking about like how you picked John Dodson and immediately regretted it, I was like, well, you're basically spoiling my Junior Dos Santos pick and how like in the week since, I wrote everything up. I've just been kind of, why did I do that? Why did I do that? Why did I do that? And I would love to basically just, say that Dos Santos would be able to. I would love to see Dos Santos all of a sudden just pull out like a wrestling game and get a win that way. But I don't think he's ever looked for the takedown basically like once in his career that I can even think off the top of my head. And I'm even more worried about my pick, just what you brought up about. Basically, this was less so a pick for Dos Santos than a pick against Rozenstruik, just for how gun shy he looked, and part of that may against Overeem in particular, and particularly that may be I was actually in the crowd in DC that night, and just that was not a fun fight until the last 5 seconds or whenever Rozenstruik actually decided to do something. So without the threat of the takedown, maybe Rosenstrike opens up more and just can, clip JDS during an exchange. I do think, respective of anything that JDS, even as the wheels are starting to fall off, is still like the faster fighter, and just like should be theoretically more elusive. It's just a matter of, okay, does he leave himself open enough to get clipped by something hard against Rosenstrike? Because if nothing else, Rosenstrike has shown that, all right, if you leave yourself open, like, Andrei Arlovski did, being the kind of main example or the most perfect example, all right, he can just, knock your lights out with one really good counter shot. I'm gonna stay consistent with my preview and pick Junior Dos Santos. Just again, it's gonna be the tight. Well, there's gonna be the threat of the knockout the entire time. This is again more of a pick against Rosenstrike, and just that basically he's just gonna remain so gun shy that it's gonna be, if not quite another Ngannou Lewis situation, but just not that pleasant to watch. I've regretted this pick basically immediately upon making it, but I am going to stick with it. Damn it! So my pick is still Junior Dos Santos via decision, and I'll hope I'm pleasantly surprised and that he busts out some wrestling.
Well, that would certainly be something to see at this point in Dos Santos' career, where he is definitely one of the more known quantities in the UFC heavyweight division, for better or for worse, and obviously largely for the better. He's one of the best heavyweights of his generation. But I am definitely leaning in the same direction as Keith here. While this is only a 3-round fight, I actually found it heartening, the Rosenstrike Overeem fight, because if not for the cut, if he had just hit Overeem and rocked him or even knocked him down and Overeem got back up, they were still seconds away from Overeem probably winning a decision in that fight. The thing that was heartening to me is that even in rounds 4 and 5, Rosenstrike did not appear to be gassed. He was still moving. He was still throwing effective offense. When you have someone who comes into the UFC as this first round knockout machine, you always have to worry about that. But he showed that he is not Shane Carwin. He doesn't just, the gas doesn't run out like 4 minutes into the fight. So he has 15 minutes to catch Dos Santos with something and probably only needs to do it once. So this could be a fight where he starts out tentative and even loses the first round just on throwing inferior volume. Dos Santos hits him a few times. Dos Santos, he hits hard. Everybody at heavyweight hits hard, especially someone with boxing fundamentals as solid as Dos Santos. But he's not a one-shot kill guy by heavyweight standards where Rosenstrike is. So give me Rosenstrike by knockout, and I'm going to say second round just because I don't think he'll really get untracked until then. But, once he feels more comfortable with what's going on, I think he's going to open up the arsenal and probably just knock Dos Santos out with a big punch on the feet and maybe follow up on the ground. That brings us to bantamweights in the co-main event of the evening. One of the UFC's budding superstars, the still undefeated Sean O'Malley, takes on a solid contender in his own right, Marlon Cheeto Vera. O'Malley is 25 years old. He is 12-0 in his MMA career, the last 5 of which cover his Dana White's Contender Series and 4 UFC appearances. In his last fight, back in June, he sparked veteran Eddie Wineland just 2 minutes into their fight in a way that not many people have done to the well-traveled Wineland. Definitely one of the more impressive performances of his career. Facing off against him will be Marlon Cheeto Vera, who lost in May to Song Yadong, a pretty straightforward decision. Before that had been on a 5-fight winning streak of his own in the UFC's bantamweight division. He is 15-6-1 in his UFC career. And the odds on these two, odds makers definitely feeling O'Malley on this one. He is as high as a -350 favorite. You can get him as low as about -260, where the comeback on Vera, you can get him as high as +250. Tom Feely, how do you feel about this one?
So after O'Malley's last win over Wineland, there's all the talk about, okay, what should be the next test for him? And I did shout out, I was like, okay, I think Tito Vera is really, that would be a really great fight. And well, I'm happy, that this fight is happening now, that it's time to actually, analyze it and pick a winner. That's it's a pretty hard one to call, which is why I like to make it in the first place. I'll give a shout out to the Bloody Elbow guys. I believe it was Conor Rebush who made the comparison with this and sort of a Conor McGregor Nate Diaz one dynamic that I kind of like. Just the idea of okay, O'Malley before the USADA issues and his injuries. Basically the 2 years off. I was like, okay, this is a guy that the UFC is going to push way too hard and he's gonna burn himself out because wasn't able to finish Terrion Ware, wasn't able to finish Andre Sukumtat, and by the late rounds just looked kind of tired. I mean, obviously the Sukumtat fight, there was also the injury issues going on. Just was a pretty terrible third round, and then since he came back, he's just been sparking out some pretty tough competition. And then, then Vera comes in the picture. Like I picked, when Vera was fighting Song Yadong, just, I picked Song by first round knockout just because I figured, okay, he's going to tee off on Vera. And he did. And Vera just survived it and, just was able to keep the pace going on. And a lot of people, I did feel Song won the decision. But, a lot of people did feel that Vera, easily could have gotten it. But I'm still going to wind up picking O'Malley here. Vera's his first rounds are kind of, it's been, I would say, he's done good to solve some of the issues of his slow start. There was a phase where he was just trying to mask that with getting a lot of aggression. Now I think he's kind of eased into at least an acceptance sort of phase when it comes to the fact that he's going to have a slow start, and in general he's a fighter who needs to feel things out over multiple rounds. And then just looking at the way that the speed differential and just how O'Malley just fires these super accurate bombs, I'm like, okay, Vera's never been knocked out. He might be tough enough, he might theoretically be tough enough to absorb this, but I also don't think he'll be hit as hard or as often or as accurately as he will be by O'Malley in those early going. Again, that McGregor Diaz dynamic sort of looms large, where okay, if O'Malley burns himself out, headhunting for that knockout in the first round, then things get super interesting because Vera's fighter improves as fight goes on. There's the whole wrestling and grappling aspect that's still, relatively untested for O'Malley against anyone of note. So Vera can start getting takedowns there. How does that look? How does O'Malley look as a third round, as a 3-round fighter now? The Ware and Sukumtat fights aren't particularly promising against someone the level of Vera, but also, O'Malley's obviously the kind of fighter who's just improving everything by leaps and bounds from fight to fight. And I think even a loss here may derail him from a public perception standpoint. And, being in a co-main event slot where, I've seen him after every fight basically grousing over his contract, with the UFC. I could see easily be this way with a loss here, just, them using this as a way to show him that he's not bigger than promotion. So there really is a lot on the line, even though I think he'll be fine as a prospect in the long term. But despite all those issues, I'm ready for this to be a war. I'm ready to be proven wrong late. Even though I do think if this goes 3 rounds, O'Malley could just simply bank enough damage early that, even with a terrible late second or third round, he could still win this. But overall, I'm picking O'Malley to just basically, make this look a lot easier than it does on paper, rifle some hard shots. And, I don't think he'll knock Vera clean out, but I think he'll be able to get the ball rolling enough that there'll be a stoppage in the first round.
All right. I actually agree with you on this one, Tom. It took me a while to kind of come around on Sean O'Malley. Anytime a promotion, the UFC or anyone else, is so obviously trying to tell me that somebody is the next big thing, I am a little bit contrarian about it. I didn't really, really believe in him until his last 2 fights, which incidentally are his first 2 fights back from his suspension, and a fighter is always a bit of an unknown quantity at that point. I can feel the comparison to McGregor Diaz, but I'm expecting it to look a little bit more like McGregor Poirier. I would say Vera is about the most established and highest ranked fighter who will oblige O'Malley with the kind of fight he wants to such an extent. I think Vera is probably going to come straight at O'Malley pretty aggressively, come at him in straight lines, and just set himself up for counters. O'Malley's shown himself to have more than just hand speed and surprising power. The uppercut to hook, uppercut fake to hook that he used to put out Wineland was, high quality stuff, pretty advanced stuff. And even though Vera has never been stopped before, he does get touched a lot. He does get rocked and get dinged up in a lot of his fights, even when he wins. As uncomfortable as it makes me to make a pick that involves something happening that we've never seen before, I also agree that O'Malley's going to win this one by knockout, probably in the first round. Keith Shillan, are we out of our minds?
Wow, 2 first-round knockout picks, man. First of all, I think it's a really good step up in coaching. Like the last time O'Malley fought, I said Eddie Wineland was like the perfect test, a name. We talked about it on the recap. I feel like this is the next step up. Like they're doing it well. They're not rushing him, but they're doing the appropriate step up. I'm going to do this breakdown. Usually I always talk about striking first, and then I go to grappling. I'm going to do it a little different. I'm going to start with the grappling. So I'm going to start with Marlon Vera. He's not a great offensive wrestler. He's not a great defensive wrestler, but he can get takedowns. He likes to catch kicks, kind of follow the kick into a takedown. He's got really slick back kicks. He's got he trains at the 10th Planet BJ. He's kind of a specialist there. He's got some good submission wins. I just in the UFC he has submission wins over Nolan Hernandez, Guido Canetti, Brian Kelleher, Roman Salazar, and then he also has a really big gas tank. Like he can bring it. We look over to O'Malley's grappling. He's not really known for his ground, but this is a guy who's been, when he was off for a long time, he was doing those grappling competitions. He did well. I think he went 2-1 with his only loss against Hector Lombard, who's much bigger than him. Defensive wrestling is an issue, and we saw that. But I think that's less on his wrestling and more on his cardio that Tom was really talking about. He slowed down in the Tyrion Ware fight. The Andre Silva fight, I'm going to give that a pass. But now I want to talk about the striking. I want to break this striking into like good and bad. So I'm going to start with Marlon. Good. He's a southpaw. He's long and lengthy. He can fight from both outside and inside, though he prefers to pressure game, which would work well against O'Malley. Other than it's not often Vera's going to be not have a reach advantage. Like he's not the taller fighter like O'Malley is, so he's going to have to fight that pressuring. He stalks his guys. He has deceiving power. The kick game is definitely his best weapon. I don't think he threw it enough in his last fight. He's strong in the clinch with the knees, and he's got a really good chin. Like he gets hit and just keeps going. Some of the bad things is I think you guys both mentioned, he's a slow starter. It seems like he always drops the first round. But on the flip side, he builds late. Like he's a guy who his output increases. It's not so that's always a good thing. He drops his hands, and he's very hittable. Like because of how strong his chin is, he's very hittable. Now, so that was the good and bad of the striking on Verd. Now let me go to the striking of O'Malley. I'll do the good and the bad. So I just want to say I've been driving O'Malley's bandwagon ever since the LFA. So I'm huge on this guy, and he's only 25, and I expect him to get better, which is scary. So let's talk about the good. Crazy athleticism, long and lengthy, so elusive. I wrote down vision on 2 different spots because I'm so impressed with his vision. Like he sees things. He's very accurate, great timing, great at beating guys at the punch. He has variety in his attacks. He's always going to the legs, going to the body, going to the head. He can fight from both stances. He uses feints to set up his strikes, but also set up later reads. He has quick hands, quick jab. His slip and rip or his step back right hand is like the best in MMA or best in the UFC already. He's got serious power. I mean, you look at this little skinny frame, you don't expect it, but he has serious power. You had all those fun spinning attacks. Now, let me talk about the bad striking of Sean O'Malley. I can't. I don't see anything. I think he's that good of a striker. Like I'm blown away with this guy striking. I think of in the last 6 months of watching film study, I haven't had more fun watching breaking down film. And Ben knows I like to do a lot of film study. he is fun. Like he's one of the funnest guys to watch. Like he does everything. So as I'm talking about this is a coming out party for Sean O'Malley. I'm with you guys. We're going all three of us. I'm taking. I thought I was gonna be the one. Oh my god, I'm making a big bold pick, and then I was like, oh man, Tom picked the first round knockout. What the heck? And then you doubled down. Well, I'm tripling down. I'm also going first round knockout by Sean O'Malley. I think he starts with them, and I think now he's gonna have all the chips in his hand when he talks about contracts and all this. And I really think this is, you mentioned Dustin Poirier. Poirier might have been the knockout for Conor McGregor that kind of built him a star. This could be that knockout that gets Sean O'Malley into a star.
All right. Somewhat unexpectedly, all three of us have Sean O'Malley by first round knockout in the co-main event. That brings us to the main event of UFC 252. UFC heavyweight champ Stipe Miocic takes on former champ Daniel Cormier in their third meeting, and in what we already have on good authority will be Cormier's last fight, win or lose. Miocic is 19-3 in his mixed martial arts career. If one can quietly scale the ladder to championship contention in the UFC, he did exactly that. For what feels like the first 2/3 of his career, he was just another guy, and then just another contender. And then before we knew it, he was on the doorstep of a title shot and kicked that door right down. His 3 losses: a loss early in his career to Stefan Struve, which in hindsight stands out as one of the more anomalous results in recent UFC history. He lost a decision to Junior Dos Santos in their first meeting back in 2014. Then embarked on a 6-fight winning streak that got him the UFC heavyweight title and an unprecedented 3 straight defenses. He knocked out Mark Hunt, knocked out Andrei Arlovsky, knocked out Fabricio Verdum to win the title, knocked out Alistair Overeem, knocked out Junior Dos Santos in their rematch, and then going into his third title defense as a slight underdog, dominated Francis Ngannou for 5 rounds. Cormier won the title from him in his next fight at UFC 226. He won it back at UFC 241, and that brings us to tonight. Cormier, 41 years old, 22-2 with 1 no contest in his professional career. While he's best known in the UFC for his light heavyweight run, in which he did come up short against John Jones twice, one of those overturned, but otherwise carved out a very credible light heavyweight title reign of his own in between Jones's self-imposed absences from the division. Nonetheless, he has more fights at heavyweight than at light heavyweight, and can be argued has a greater resume at heavyweight than at light heavyweight. He came in as an alternate and won Strikeforce's final heavyweight Grand Prix, almost certainly the greatest heavyweight tournament since the fall of Pride Fighting Championships. He won the title from Miocic in 2018 at UFC 226 to become the UFC's second ever simultaneous 2-division champ. Defended the title against Derek Lewis in November of 2018, thus becoming the first fighter ever to defend titles in 2 UFC divisions. Lost to Miocic almost exactly a year ago, and that brings us to Saturday's fight. Question for the panel: is the winner of Saturday's main event the greatest heavyweight in UFC history, and is the answer different depending on who it is? What do you have, Tom?
So I think if Miocic wins, just basically like if you ask me, all right, who the greatest UFC heavyweight of all time is basically have to be either one of these 2 guys or Cain Velasquez. And I think honestly, if it was peak relative to the division at the time, like if you had me pick one fighter, I think honestly it would be Velasquez, like during that the second and third Junior Dos Santos fight, that era, Velasquez. But frankly, in preparation for this question, in preparing this card, I looked at his resume and just, the peak is so short that when it comes to overall GOAT status, I just don't think you can give that to Kane. So in a way, it really does have to come down to one of these two guys from purely UFC level. I think if Stipe wins, he's pretty clearly like, if you ask me to pick right now in the catbird seed, who it would be, I would have to say it's Miocic, just in terms of length of resume, in terms of the level of the wins, and just having the 3-fight title defense streak alone. I realize it's not quite as strong as a case, as a lot of other divisions that have had kingpins reign over it, over a long period of time. But you got to kind of get to Stipe. Cormier gets a lot more interesting. Just, I'm not entirely prepared to say, okay, if Cormier wins, he's going to be the UFC heavyweight GOAT just because of those qualifiers, because so much of his resume in the UFC came at light heavyweight. So if you're taking that out of the equation, and the wins, the early wins in Strikeforce, like, even though there's a lot of chaff in there, I think either way, it's kind of the funny thing where either way, win or lose, especially with if Miocic loses and then, can come back and win the heavyweight title and, has a few good years left in him, I think he could, still clearly come out with that crown. But it's kind of a funny thing where win or lose, I think, Miocic could, for both men, I think Miocic could wind up being the greater UFC heavyweight fighter. But when it comes in terms of, all-time ranking, when you're factoring all the stuff outside of the UFC, overall light heavyweight, I think also win or lose, it might be hard for Miocic to catch Cormier when it comes to sort of the all-time GOAT rankings. So, I mean, it's a little bit of hedging there. But if Miocic wins, I think he's pretty much the UFC's heavyweight GOAT, at least for the time being. And then with Cormier, it'll be really, if he wins, it'll be really interesting to see, just in a lot of ways, where the dividend goes from there.
Keith, what do you think?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unwrap there. So Tom was talking about Cain Velasquez, and I think Cain Velasquez is the best talent at heavyweight that I've seen. He was a perfect blend of striking, wrestling, cardio, output, but accomplishment matters. Like, what you have accomplished matters when you talk about the all-time greats, so that's why it can't be Cain Velasquez. So the very fact that we're asked in this question, and Tom mentioned about, like, Daniel Cormier, more than half of his career was at light heavyweight in the UFC. That just, like, how great was Daniel Cormier, and how great could he have been if he spent his entire career, like, if he spent his entire career at heavyweight, like, we might not even be asked in this question. It would be, like, stupid, like, is Tom Brady the greatest Patriot player ever? Like, it would be, like, so stupid, So if the winner of this is, are they the best UFC heavyweight? If it's Stipe Miocic, then it's a no-brainer. He would be the best UFC heavyweight, no time. If DC, you could still make an argument for Stipe, but it's going to be hard when he'd be down 0-2 to Daniel Cormier. But it just comes down to, like, when you talk about, like, Randy Couture, like, where does Randy Couture rank? You kind of rank Randy Couture on his whole career, but he never ranks high in, like, the heavyweight rankings, all-time heavyweights. He never ranks high in the light heavyweight rankings because he kind of, spent time in both. And that's how I kind of feel like what happened with Daniel. Daniel Cormier, if he wins this fight, he's probably top 3 or 4 fighters all time. But he'll still, like, would he be the heavyweight GOAT? Maybe. Where would he rank in light heavyweight? 2, 3, 4, somewhere in that range. Stipe is no-brainer. But the question you got to ask yourself, if Stipe wins, is he, forget UFC heavyweight, is he just the GOAT at heavyweight? I mean, we'll say it, is he better than Fedor? And you could make an argument he already has a better resume. If he gets a second win over Daniel Cormier, you have an extremely compelling argument based on wins over, it would be DC twice, Junior Dos Santos, Fabricio Verdum, Roy Nelson, Andre Arlovski, Francis Ngannou. I mean, I'm just spitballing this. The other guys, Mark Hunt. You add all these guys in title defenses and all that. Like, I probably would argue that he's better than Fedor. But while I was thinking about this week, because that people have been mentioned Fedor, it was a fight that I never thought I would want in those dream matchups. But how fun would Fedor versus Daniel Cormier been? Like, that would have been fantastic. Like, I feel like I'd want that matchup more than Stipe. But so the idea, I think it's a no-brainer. The winner of this is the great. At least Stipe is the greatest heavyweight of all time if he wins. Greatest UFC heavyweight and probably the greatest heavyweight. This does so much for the legacy. The winner of this fight is maybe. Yeah, if Daniel wins, he's definitely a top 5 fighter of all time. If Stipe wins, he's banging on the door of top 5 all time. So, yeah, it's really exciting for this matchup.
Fantastic. As far as projections for the fight, I'll go ahead and go first here. I've gone back and forth on this one really constantly, and have kind of flip-flopped or been tempted to flip-flop, most recently just seeing what kind of shape Cormier appears to be in this week, where he looks in rare form. Like, heavyweight Cormier is never going to have a six-pack. That's just not the body he has. He is a guy that has fantastic explosive athleticism and incredible strength while looking a little pudgy. That's just what the man's got. But he looks in about as good a shape as I've seen him in at heavyweight. And that does give me some pause. And I go into this fight wondering if he's willing to use his wrestling. Because even at age 41, as a lot of things have kind of faded, he is still one of the greatest just pure takedown artists the heavyweight division has ever seen. For a guy who has, split his career at light heavyweight, he's never had a problem getting a fight to the ground when he wanted it to. He's never been in a situation where a strength disadvantage seemed to trouble him. We're talking about a guy who just absolutely bullied Frank Mir against the fence and in the clinch as he wanted to. We're talking about a guy who used kind of a high single crotch lift to dump Josh Barnett on his dome in a way that really had never been done to him before or since. And those are two of the more true big-bodied top heavyweights in, of their generation. In the second fight, in the first round, he took Miocic down and he won the round that way. And I think that would be his best path to victory on Saturday. I just don't know if I trust him to do it. I expect this fight will probably look like their second fight in broad strokes. Cormier with momentum early on, at least holding his own in the striking exchanges, maybe securing a takedown, but starting to lose steam as it goes along. Miocic investing in body work, starting to pull more ahead as Cormier becomes fatigued, and either winning a decision going away by winning the last several rounds or getting another stoppage in the championship rounds. Keith Shillan, am I out of my gourd?
So no, picking either guy. I remember when Conor McGregor fought Khabib Nurmagomedov, I was pretty confident in Khabib winning. But the people who just completely dismissed one side or the other, I dismissed Khabib's going to trash him and this and that. No, obviously Khabib did trash him, but to completely ignore the skill set of Conor McGregor or completely ignore the skill set of Daniel Cormier or Stipe Miocic, you can't. These guys, besides the fact of everything that goes with this, they're both probably the two best heavyweights walking earth today. They're still. I just feel like both these guys could go for 3-4 more years. I'll start with Stipe. Straight punches. That's always been the thing about him. He's not a looping puncher. He's a throw it right down the pipe kind of guy. His straight right is deadly. As Fabricio Verdum. The fact, I'm smile anytime I talk about body shots. The fact that now he's suddenly going to the body. I love that. He's got incredible power. He needs to move a lot laterally. He was doing it in the very beginning of the first round. He was moving a lot. He was making Daniel Cormier chasing him, and he was doing well in that fight. He needs to make sure he doesn't get cornered. The small cage is actually going to hurt that. He needs to also keep him at the end of his punches. He's got an 8-inch reach advantage. He's going to need to use that. He's going to need to up his volume. And what I mean, he doesn't need to land. He just needs DC to have to get through a storm. Like, so I think he needs to be the guy throwing more punches. He needs to be when it gets to the clinch. He needs to be competitive. He's not going to win the clinch against DC. He just needs to be competitive. He needs to land shots of his own. He needs to make DC have to work in there, not just have that be like a safe zone for DC. The thing that going back to 2 fights ago, the thing that's really make me worried, and something I talk about JDS is I'm worried about the chin of Stipe Miocic. Now, he took a lot of damage in the last fight. He was knocked out by DC in the first fight. Going back to, Stefan Struve dropped him and finished him off, but he had that war against JDS. Alistair Overeem almost knocked him out, if you remember that one. And one thing he does is he backs straight up, and that's like that is like his worst mistake. Now, it was his best moment in his career when he knocked out Fabrice Verdun because he was able to back up and still land this incredible power, and it was a little bit of the punch coming through and Verdun running into it, so like the two, the head-on collision. But one thing I should bring up, he's a good wrestler. Like it won't matter if it's a big wrestling match, but he is a good wrestler. This is not gonna be like this not Volkan Oezdemir with DC getting takedowns on him. But let's go back to DC. When I did film study, the thing that jumped out to me is like, and I don't know, something I either just underappreciated or didn't really give enough credit. DC has fast hands. And he's one of the best pocket strikers ever. He's probably the best dirty boxer ever. And that hurts me to say because Randy Couture is my all-time favorite fighter. And to say someone has passed Randy, it kind of hurts me that. His Kailatai is deadly. If he gets his hand in the back of the head between hitting you or setting up that single, because he has a single, and a single can come off that Kailatai. If you and he comes back both ways, he can do a ankle pick off. It's really good. He does really good with hand fighting, but one thing he can't do, he can't overreach because now that body shot is there. But the body shots obviously was an issue, and that was the breaking point. But it still goes with the weakness that we've been talking about for DC forever, is that he leans back to the right or to his opponent's left, and everything lands. It was the left hook. It wasn't the right. It was the left hook, the left uppercut to the body. Even when DC was when Stipe was opening up, it was, if he starts dropping his arm to block the body, he can go with the left hook. Like, that is an issue. I mean, Stipe has never been the guy who throws like high kicks, but that's what John Jones hit him with a high kick. That would be there if he was going against a kickboxer. That if he can go to the body, now he can go up top. But I'm not too concerned with the body shots because this is something DC, like, the body shots was never been an issue with DC. It was the left side, but not the body itself. So, like, I don't think suddenly, 20 fights at a high level in that is this huge thing. I think it's just like a small thing. Now, one thing I do like is suddenly Dan Cormier throws a lot of low calf kicks. Like, this is this new thing in his game. I like that. He's got he showed power at heavyweight. And he's one of the best grapplers ever. And then when I say grapplers, I don't just mean wrestlers. Everyone always says he's one of the best wrestlers. No, he's one of the best grapplers. Now let's talk about his wrestling. The takedowns, the single leg you talked about, like you mentioned, picking up Josh Thompson, dumping on his face, throwing around Frank Mir. But how about the fact when he picked up Stipe, he walked around him in the cage. It wasn't just picked him up and threw him. He walked him around and then he spun him in the air. Remember when he one of the best takedowns when it was at light heavyweight, but when he launched Alexander Gustafsson. He's fantastic. But when I want to talk about his grappling, he doesn't get enough credit for grappling. Like, he takes you down, he controls you. It's over. The round's over. Stipe, he took him out, the round's over. Volkan Oezdemir, the round's over. Derek Lewis. Say what you want about Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis has always had that, like, burst up. Even when he started getting up, Dino just dropped him back down. He was giving up a lot of size to Derek Lewis. So who wins this fight? I understand why you had a hard time. I'm gonna have time. So to me, it's like three things have to happen. It comes down to me. Number one is who moves more, and what I mean by that is, does Stipe, can he move more to keep his distance, or is DC going to be able to? Will DC move more to get in? Like, for DC to win, if every step that Stipe takes back, Daniel's going to have to take 2 steps in. Or if he takes a foot, he needs to take a foot and a half. He needs to get inside. So that's the first one. The second thing is you mentioned, Daniel's going to have to wrestle. It opens up his striking, it opens up everything. He's going to have to wrestle, and he's going to. But the biggest thing is he has to have to win the wrestling. Like, he can't take down Stipe and then Stipe get up and win. He can't waste energy there. Like, he needs at least 2 or 3 takedowns. Now, if Daniel Cormier gets 3 takedowns, and they're in 3 separate rounds, that could be 3 rounds in the bag for him. Which goes into my third point, is if there is a lot of wrestling, I think there's going to be, Miocic needs to be competitive enough in the wrestling to tire DC out. He can't be the one on bottom battling. He needs to be getting up and needs the explosive movement of DC to drain his own cardio more than the grinding of DC on top of him. Those are 3 things. Now, who's going to win? I'm a little sentimental. It's his last fight. I'm a big DC guy. I feel like the guy who's always been number 2, that's been like the narrative on him. If he loses this fight, think about it. He retires in his career. He'd have 2 losses to the light heavyweight GOAT, John Jones. He'd have 2 losses to the heavyweight GOAT, Stipe Miocic. And I just don't feel like it'd be right. Like, I just feel like if any fighter in history deserves that moment to win, it's Daniel Cormier. I know that's not how MMA works, but I'm going to go with it. I think the X's and O's are there for him. I expect a war. I'm going to take DC by unanimous decision. So 1-1. Go break the tie, my man.
And let me add in to Cormier's story of heartbreak that I believe all of his collegiate losses in wrestling were to Cale Sanderson.
Was it? Yeah, I know his.
I believe he went 0-4 against Cale in college.
That's it, and that's all. That's the only people he ever lost to.
That's about as second best as you can get. All right, we have
change your weight class, my man. Get in the easy weight class.
we have some tentative dissension here, as Keith and I both practically talked ourselves out of our picks like in real time. So take us on home, Tom. What do you got?
Bringing down the hammer. Yeah, so gonna echo a lot of what you said. The funny thing about this is, and I mentioned this on Twitter. I was breaking down the fight. Basically, other weight classes, look at the chess match and everything that's going on. For a heavyweight fight, this is, a lot more tactical than a great majority of them are. But then at the end of the day, it's going to come down to, one punch in this fight could just end it, where it's like, okay, all the analysis in the world. And, we saw it with the first fight where, okay, before he even gets out of the gates, just quick knockout, none of the analysis in the world matters. But I really am curious to see just how, I'm assuming Miocic is going to build off of the whole body shot strategy from the last fight. Because I usually, when it comes to these rematches and trilogy fights, I'd like to think at least you pick up where the last one left off to an extent. And I'm curious to see how Cormier, plugs up that hole, especially because, he's actually talked in a lot of the lead up to this that, he's aware of that being a problem. It's not just, okay, I'm just going to power through this next time where I got caught. Or, sometimes how fighters can talk themselves into like, okay, this thing that isn't a problem isn't actually a problem. And just, bringing up, okay, even if he defends the body shots, like I don't really see in a striking match just how he does that without opening up something else, basically. Like, just Cormier's a great fighter, but at this point in his career, I've never thought of him as a particularly defensive mastermind, and I don't think he's going to suddenly plug up all those holes, in the last year. So that comes down to like, okay, is he going to just basically not give Miocic the time to do any of that? And going back to Ben, your point, like, is he going to rely on his wrestling? And then, Keith saying like, okay, like Miocic has to fight enough to tire him out. And this basically comes down to, and the reason I'm going to wind up picking Miocic is going to come down to basically pace and cardio, more so pace, because I think, Cormier's cardio isn't terrible, but I just think, but at this point in his career, and we saw it with the last fight, helped along by the body shots, obviously, that as long as Miocic can A, survive, and B, make Cormier work, that, in the late rounds, I think the finish is going to be there. And I really don't see a way, like, I think Miocic is a good enough wrestler to at least make Cormier fight, and that's, going to tire him out to some extent, particularly if this is on the feet. Again, with the small cage, with the pace and the pressure and the speed, especially early on, that Cormier has, I think Cormier is going to have a lot of success early, basically be able to literally beat Miocic to the punch, a lot of times early, cause a lot of damage, and that could just be the fight right there. But assuming Miocic survives, and, heavyweight's a crapshoot when it comes to just hitting that perfect punch to an extent. And when you're looking at this fight in broad strokes, I think Miocic is going to be able to survive the early going. I think if Cormier gets his wrestling game going, which he should if he looks for it, that Miocic is going to be able to put up enough fight to tire him out. And then just I go back to the Joseph Benavidez fights and everything. Just people who deserve it do not get happy endings in MMA. The only person who gets a joke, the only person who got like the big happy end of the career title reign, and even he went out on a shield, was Michael Bisping. And Michael Bisping is like one of the big the Michael Bisping, I think will even admit to an extent that he's a bit of a dick. So that's the kind of guy who gets the good ending in MMA. Him and John Jones are going to be the two guys who get like the happy endings on the way out of MMA, and just it wouldn't happen. I hope it's not going to be as brutal as how Benavidez went out in his last fight, but I just think that Miocic is going to survive, Miocic is going to chip away, and then it's going to be and still sometime late in the championship rounds.
All right, that is two of us tentatively in favor of Stipe Miocic to retain his title and move into an even more favorable spot on at the table for the discussion of the greatest heavyweight in mixed martial arts history. This has been the UFC 252 Roundtable, brought to you by Loudmouth MMA Podcast Network and the Sherdog Radio Network. For Keith Shillan and Tom Feely, I am Ben Duffy. Have a great evening and enjoy the fights.